Welcome to the Rachel's English Podcast. In today's episode, I'm sitting down with my husband David and we're discussing a conversation we had when we were in Italy. Now, when we went to Italy, we didn't study much Italian, and so communication was a challenge, but we were able to pick up some phrases and we did do a little bit of studying. And in this conversation, we're talking about how much more there is to do when learning a language than just learning from a book. We're talking a lot about how you can personally engage with the language and the culture and the people and the personalities around you. And these kinds of things, I think, are really underrated when someone is learning a new language. People tend to focus so much on book knowledge, and that's really just part of the story. If you need help understanding what's being said here, you can always get a free copy of the transcript for any of the podcasts. Please go to rachelsenglish.com/podcast and search for this episode. Okay, let's dive right in. Thanks, David, for being here and sharing your thoughts about this experience.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it.
What an awesome trip it was.
It was incredible.
David and I were just saying this morning how it's been a week ago today we were flying home. What is that? Does it seem like a week ago or does it seem further away to you?
I would say it seems a little bit further. It's been such an awful week, really, of transitioning back and everybody's sleep schedule. It hasn't been a fun week.
Yeah, no, it has been tough getting Stoney back on a normal sleep schedule. But I think last night, he finally did it. He slept 12 hours without waking up.
Yeah,
that was amazing.
Crossed.
Okay, so about speaking another language. Actually, one night, you and I and Audrey and Leon, well, first I should say David's sister Audrey and her husband Leon came to stay with us in Italy for about 9 days that we traveled together.
Mm-hmm.
And one night, we were sitting around talking about what it was like for us, like on that trip, in that moment, to be non-native speakers. And in some cases I'm not sure if, I guess everybody knew at least a few phrases, but I mean, we're not just non-native speakers. Like, we speak almost no Italian.
Right.
So one night we were sitting around talking about this and I pulled out my phone and started recording it as a voice memo because I thought it was so interesting what was being said. So let's listen to a little bit of that.
Okay.
So at the beginning of this clip, I'm talking about students who I'm trying to get to embody the whole language and be more of a pure imitator rather than being themselves trying to figure out how to sound. Do you understand the difference there, David?
Yeah, I mean, it came out in that conversation. I hadn't thought about it before that. But yeah, this idea that if you, in a sense, can leave your whole self behind and just imitate another person, I feel like that's what we talked about that night for a little bit.
Yeah. Okay, let's hear what we were saying.
And so I think in a way when they're no longer feeling so much that it's them and they're like taking a parallel step that's a straight switch to another idea of someone else, then some of those inhibitions go away and the imitation becomes more accurate. Because for a lot of people, imitating a native speaker feels very exaggerated.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Italian can feel very like there's no way that I would do it like that.
Dramatic,
yes,
that exaggerated.
Exactly. Right.
It's also more playful.
So here we're talking about how exaggerated it can feel to do anything that's sort of outside of your normal language feeling and normal language sounds. And for us, Italian felt especially that way because Italian is such an expressive language. And I think that culturally, the people are so expressive. Would you say that is a generally true statement compared to like the broader world?
Oh, I don't know if I would say broader world. I would say as compared to American English, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I think that there are lots of other languages that are like that too. But that in particular, when you set that beside American English looks reserved and stiff compared to Italian.
And yet for someone who's coming from a different language, probably even Italian, to English, anytime you're dealing with sounds and characteristics that are not your own, it feels awkward to the point where it feels exaggerated and maybe even sometimes clownish, like to go all the way there. But it's so important that students try to let themselves go all the way there. And that was one thing we were kind of feeling when we were there.
And this idea that maybe it's easier to let yourself go there if you sort of abandon yourself and kind of completely take on the persona, the character of someone that you're observing that's a native speaker.
Yeah. Letting go of yourself. And we talk about that more. Let's keep listening.
Yeah.
And more
play,
fun.
Play is so important.
Right. If you're more playful and you just kind of enter into it more playfully,
Mm-hmm.
you don't take yourself so seriously. And so maybe that's easier then in a way.
Yeah. So David, I'm so glad to hear you've been experimenting with that on this trip.
Yeah. And I remember that from living in Dominican Republic.
Mm.
You know, you do the first 6 weeks in the city and then 6 weeks on service. And so on service, it was this sort of country accent. But it was when I was actually good enough at Spanish to, you know, even have a foundation to take on.
Mm-hmm.
So, David, here you're talking about when you were living abroad, how you started out living in the capital of Santo Domingo. Is that right?
Right.
And then after 6 weeks of language study, you went out into the country and you were in a pretty rural area.
Yeah, very. Mm-hmm.
For the next 6 weeks. And you had been saying that the Spanish spoken in these two places are the Spanish that you learned in your formal Spanish class, and then the Spanish that was actually being spoken in the rural area. Those two Spanishes were quite different.
Correct. Mm-hmm. Right.
Let's keep listening.
You know, the character of the language, this thing that we're talking about. And so I think I did that the second 6 weeks that I came back to the city. And I had one night then at the host family in the city, and something happened, and I made a comment. I don't even remember what it was now. And the host mom says, "Ay, que campesino."
Okay, so what happened here? You had picked up some phrases and a way of speaking that was different than how your host family in the city spoke.
Yeah, and I think it was a common sort of curse word kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was maybe a little bit sort of edgy and, you know.
Yeah.
A little
questionable whether or not you should be using it freely.
Well, yeah, probably. But it was also, I think, my accent and just the way that I said it made her say, "Oh my God, this guy has turned into a country bumpkin."
Right, which we talk about later is actually a compliment because it's like, wow, you absorbed where you were so well.
Yeah.
Like, you far boy.
What a country bumpkin.
Oh.
Because I had, you know, the nuance, I had taken on the accent and that, you know, the subtlety of the Spanish of folks that I had been spending 24/7.
Which is totally not what you'd been studying. You'd been studying textbook Spanish,
Right.
perfect Spanish, but then when you're there and you're embodying it, you take on the character and the feeling and the vocabulary and the lilt.
Actually, this is interesting because when we talk about the difference between textbook Spanish and the Spanish that you were actually speaking around people, that's one thing that a lot of my students come learning English from textbooks in a classroom from reading, and then they get so messed up with pronunciation and fluency because of we don't have the correlation between letters and sounds. English is not a phonetic language. So they're coming and they're having a hard time with pronunciation, and then they're fully pronouncing each word because they think, you know, this is how I can be clear in the language. And then they come to understand that Americans don't do that at all. We do tons of reductions where we change the sounds in a less important word so that we can make it said really quickly. And so there's a huge difference for students between often what they've learned about English and how English is actually pronounced. And that's why they have such a hard time with listening comprehension. And so when they come to Rachel's English or they start seeing what we're doing, then they start to get, oh my gosh, this is actually how I can understand people. This is actually how I will sound native.
Mm-hmm, right. And I was also just thinking about that time when I was living in the countryside. I had no Spanish classes during those 6 weeks. So what I was doing a lot of is what you encourage people to do, which is to listen to yourself and then try it again. You know, I was listening to other people and also listening to how I sounded constantly all day and trying to with my own ear, correct how my mouth and vocal cords are forming the words. It's just interesting that I learned a lot about how to actually sound like a native speaker. And I had literally 0 minutes of class time during that whole
Right.
6-week period.
You were just around native speakers. What a novel idea.
Yeah. And right. Mm-hmm. And listening and repeating and listening and repeating.
And the thing that I loved about when I was in a similar experience is, David, is when you're not looking at a book and reading what people say and trying to do translations and trying to learn vocabulary words, when you're not doing that and you're just hanging out with native speakers listening, then you pick up on phrases they use that might be slang or might be casual, might be, not something you would see in a textbook. And then you start to put together, oh, this is what they use when they want to say this. And I always found that learning a phrase in an actual real context of how a native speaker is using it always made it so much easier for me to learn and remember, because it's like the whole foundation is there. It's not separate. It's like part of the real thing, part of the real conversation.
I remember actually learning a phrase. I forget what it was. I think it was something along the lines of, hey, come over here. And I learned how to use it very accurately and say it exactly right. And I thought that I was just learning a reduction or a slang. But then when I got back and talked to people, or somebody maybe heard me use it, and I thought I was using slang, and it was actually the command tense of the word that I didn't even know I was learning. In other words, I actually learned some formal and correct Spanish.
And you didn't know
by
it
just repeating,
because you hadn't heard it or learned it in a formal setting.
But I learned it
right
contextually.
Yeah, how amazing is that? Like you heard the sounds, you knew what they meant, you saw the nuance from repeated context, you did it yourself, and here you were learning like some conjugation that you had not even studied in school.
Yeah,
that's cool. Okay, let's keep listening.
Of everyone around you.
Did that bother you at that point, or?
Oh no! If anything, it was compliment
Right,
at that point.
Like, okay, I got it.
Yeah.
Like my Spanish is so good that someone is accusing me of sounding like a country bumpkin.
David, should we define country bumpkin quickly? It comes up a few times there. Country bumpkin is a derogatory term. I mean, it's not like super harsh.
No, but it's definitely derogatory.
And it's somebody calling someone a country bumpkin means, they live in a rural area. They're sort of isolated. It's maybe saying that they have not traveled, have not seen the big city, have not gotten around, are not
they're
too educated,
unsophisticated.
Yeah, a little
simple.
Uneducated even, wouldn't you say that would be part of it? Yeah. So when David used this one phrase, his host mom in the city thought that made him sound a little uneducated, a little unsophisticated.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh man, that was devastating to go home at that point. After being literally the last week feeling close to fluent.
Wow.
And having spent 12 weeks in hell.
Wow.
Of not.
You were almost
of
there.
Feeling not fluent, and then just at the end feeling like
yanked out from under you.
This is coming. I got it. I understand most of what's being said.
I never got there. I never was like, I'm almost fluent.
Well, I definitely. Well, yeah, fluent would not.
Capable.
I would say I still felt barely conversational at the end of 13 weeks.
I knew what they were talking about mostly.
But when you were in the country, you were much more isolated. My second 6 weeks, there was a lot of English going on. And that probably is what made the difference.
It's a big difference.
Yeah.
I know Becca, with Chinese, she was more out in a village.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was very good for her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think it's a huge difference, and it speaks to the power of that full immersion.
Yeah.
But I think it's also you can be in immersion, but without some of that lightheartedness or letting go of some of your inhibitions, it still won't be enough. I mean, I think there is something about that is so crucial.
I do think some personalities just do a lot better.
Like Christina in China, she was like out there and learning a song on the riverboat on the Yangtze River because she wanted to learn that, she wanted to learn Chinese. I'm much more reserved and much more shy. And so that's more challenging for me. But I can do a lot of listening and kind of come home and then do my persona or with people I know, do my talking and maybe gain some strength in my language skills that way. So I think it's okay to be different types of people too. And maybe that's part of what you're talking about in terms of persona, like taking a certain persona, is that however you like to do that is okay. There's not one right way that is the good way.
Right.
There's just different ways.
Right. And I do think that my students who are just unwilling to let themselves go there, those are the ones that really suffer with their language learning. But people who can do it in one way or another, I think are the ones that I listen to them and I think, okay, yeah, they're gonna go somewhere. But for a lot of people, not a lot, for some people, it just never feels okay to do something that sounds foreign or feels foreign.
But it's a loss of control.
Yes.
Okay, so here, a couple of things I want to say. First of all, at the table, it was, as I said earlier, my sister-in-law and brother-in-law, and then David and I. And we're talking about our other family members, and all four of us at this table have had this same experience. We all went to the same college that has a strong emphasis on an international experience. So 80% of the people that go to the college that we went to do a semester abroad. That's very high for the US. And I have gone to the Dominican Republic for my semester abroad. David, also the Dominican Republic. My sister-in-law, Audrey, went to Haiti. Do you remember where Leon went? I know it was Spanish speaking.
I'm not sure. It might have been Costa Rica.
I don't think it was Costa Rica.
I don't either, actually.
I can't remember. Was it El Salvador? No, I don't think so. Okay, we can't remember the country that he went to. But then we're also talking about my other sister-in-law, Christina, who went to China, my niece, Becca, who also went to China. So a lot of members of our family have gone to this same college and have all had this experience of going somewhere for a semester where you do not speak the language and, in some cases being plopped out in a very rural area where there's no English being spoken. Now, for me, as I said in that clip, my second half of my semester was not in a rural area. It was in another town. And in that town, I was around a lot of people speaking English. There were actually two other Americans living in my house with that Spanish-speaking family. And the son was fluent in English pretty much and loved the opportunity to practice it. So that was really, I said I felt barely conversational when I left that semester. And that's partly because I was never really immersed. I was around Americans or English speakers too much of the time. And I wonder what would have happened if I'd been placed somewhere where there was no English, where English wasn't an option. The idea of doing that for 13 weeks is really exciting to me. I wish that had been my experience, sort of.
Yeah, it's certainly different. And I also think in that clip that we just listened to, I do think it's really fascinating what Audrey said about you can be somewhere where you are immersed in the language. In other words, where there's no other speaker of your language that's around. And so you're the whole way surrounded by the language, but you can choose still to not immerse yourself. I mean, there is this choice about being playful, being willing to, what's the word?
Engage.
Engage.
And it has so much to do with your comfort. I mean, I think anyone in that situation would be uncomfortable, but how comfortable are you with discomfort? Will you lean into that or will you withdraw?
That gets right at it. I agree. The discomfort is guaranteed to be there. And it's what you do with it, how you're going to relate to it. I agree. You can lean in, you can embrace it. You can say to yourself, you know what? I'm going to have a day that's completely uncomfortable, but that's okay. And I'm going to be okay with that.
Right. For the record, discomfortable is not a word we actually use, just in case anybody is thinking about picking it up from David. But we do use discomfort and we do use uncomfortable. And yes, I said in that clip, the idea of when I see a student who's like experimenting with English sounds and I can sense the discomfort that people have with this. The ones who kind of smile and are willing to like, kind of put their chin out and do something different are the ones who I think, okay, they're gonna be fine. They're gonna get there. And then the ones who are like kind of withdrawn back and their chin is like sort of drawn back into themselves and they're just not able to cross that line. Those are the ones that I think this is too bad. It's their personality that is sort of interfering with them being able to pick up this language, because it's not all book learning. It is embodying with your whole self the persona and the feeling of the language. And that can be pretty strange.
And you talk about this with your Rachel's English Academy students. There's a mindset piece. And, to be a traveler is a different mindset than someone who never leaves their culture of origin. And, there are so many aspects of this that are culturally lodged. I mean, again, back to our time in Italy, I think Italians culturally encourage playfulness and joking and lightheartedness, and they deal with the realities of being human by being playful, light, and joking their way through it. But a lot of that is culturally lodged. I think in a lot of other cultures, there's not a freedom within the culture to be light, right? And that's normed culturally for a lot of reasons, and it makes the culture work well. And but if you're gonna travel, and I'm using travel in the widest sense of the word, if you're gonna engage other cultures, there is this different mindset that you have to be in, which is to say, mistakes are where learning happens. Playfulness is a great way to connect with other people. Of course, there are times for serious conversation, and there are lots of ways to connect, but it's a lot easier when you're connecting with body language and nonverbals. A smile goes a long way. A shared laugh about something that crosses all cultures.
A friendly
is a great
expression.
Way. Yeah.
And I just want to say, you're talking about this idea of like the traveler mentality, and you don't ever have to leave your own country to have that and to have that approach to the language that you're learning. So many of my students are not in the US, but they're engaged with this language learning process, and they can have that mentality of picking up the culture via the language, how we use language and that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Again, travel in the widest sense, that it's a mindset. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Let's start listening again to the conversation, and keep in mind here that we're discussing the discomfort and the loss of control that can come with starting something new or learning something new.
And how frightening is that?
It's very scary. So I'm not critical of people who can't do that.
No, I do understand.
Actually very, very scary. It's a loss of control, and you don't have that. And so it's frightening.
I agree. I get very much so, because I think I am definitely reserved. I think people who know me wouldn't say that, but people who don't yet know me and then know me later will say, I thought you were really cold when I first met you. I've had several people say that. I didn't get you. And I am more reserved than once I know somebody, too. I'm so different, but
yeah.
I definitely get I'm not stepping out of my comfort zone for this kind of orientation.
The American me will probably always be reserved.
Mm-hmm. But the Italian
that sense of, could I take on a new person that is different than that?
Yes.
And just step into that person, and I don't have to give up the American me, but I can own the Italian me.
And that's a good point. Maybe that's something I can tell my students is as you're developing this persona, develop somebody who's not afraid of mistakes, even if you are.
Right. And you can still be have that other identity as your nationality.
Yeah.
But this is your persona now.
Yeah.
And
So I'm going to be a shy American, but I'm also going to be a very outgoing Chinese.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
now,
that's interesting.
This is where I think some people get into, but I shouldn't have to leave myself behind to fit in America. And I get that. And that's where it gets tricky with advising people to develop a different persona is I don't want anyone thinking that I'm feeling like they need to give themselves up. And I think a lot of people would say, no, I'm not going to give myself up.
But maybe it's more about, we all have different parts of ourselves. Like I have a very shy and reserved part, but then I do have sort of one part of me that's more adventurous. So maybe nurturing that part of me. Like it's not totally not being myself.
Right. We all act differently in different situations.
Also, language is sort of, you do have to take another script. You do have to take another way because it is a different way of being. It's not only words. It is a way of being.
And actually, speaking of script, reminds me sort of what gave me this idea originally was the show House MD. Have you guys ever seen that? There's an actor, Hugh Laurie, there.
Oh, yeah.
And I totally assumed he was American. And then I heard an interview with him and realized that he was British. And I was like, whoa, his accent is perfect. And then I was like, a lot of actors developed perfect accents when they switch genres. And I've thought it's because they're developing a character as they're developing that voice. And maybe that is part of what helps you really embody the nuance of something.
The model of an actor is a good
full development
understanding of how you enter another culture and do that.
It's full development, and it's not just how do I work on this accent, but it's who is this person, who am I, and how do I talk as a part of that.
Yeah.
So David, it's that last chunk really sort of gets down to what we're talking about and what we were feeling when we were there. Was it's not just sounds, it's not just language, it's a full body, full person, full personality, throwing yourself in, identifying with Italians, trying to emulate Italians in order to learn Italian.
Yeah, to the point of, I love how Leon says his American self can always be shy or reserved, but he can be a bold Italian. That's just great.
Yeah, how fun is that? It's an invitation to be someone you've always wanted to be, or to stretch in one way or another when you're learning a new language.
Versus thinking of that as scary or intimidating. Of course, it's always going to be scary and intimidating, but it's nice to add that layer of interpretation to say, oh yeah, this is an invitation to be bold and playful and funny and all those other things.
Yeah, just great lessons for anyone studying any language to keep in mind. David, thanks so much for being here and discussing this with me. It was, it was very enlightening. I'm glad I pulled out my phone to capture that, because that was what we were feeling in that moment. That conversation spun out of the experience we'd had that day.
It was really fun at the time. At one point there, you can hear somebody filling up a wine glass. We had a couple glasses of wine and were able to sit around and talk about our experience. That was such a fun night.
It was a fun night. Stoney was asleep. One of the good things about Stoney is the kid goes to sleep very easily and very early. And so we just had so many wonderful evenings just discussing our travels while we were there. Okay, guys, well, this is part 1 in a 3-part series that we're doing about our trip to Italy. This was the language part. Look for the next 2 parts coming out over the next 2 weeks. So you might want to head to the iTunes store or to Stitcher to subscribe to this podcast. I would love it if you did. You know what? Let's go one step further. Share this podcast. Share it with your friends and family. Post it to Facebook or whatever social media you use and say, hey guys, if you're studying English, listen to this. It's not just about what you study in the book. It's about so much more than that. So thanks for listening. Thanks for sharing. And we will see you next time. Bye, guys.
Bye, guys.